Okay, welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I am Brian Calley, the CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan. As you can see, it's a beautiful sunny day out behind me, and I'm wearing a short sleeve button-up shirt, which my daughter always says makes me look like a tourist, but so be it. Somebody told me these are going back in style, so I got it out of the closet. Anyway, today is kind of a special program, and partly because I don't have my normal co-host who's off enjoying some well-earned vacation time, Sarah Miller, but have filling in for her as a co-host today, David Rhoa. And of course, people will know David very well. D2R Consulting is his business, but long history with SBAM. In fact, at one point was the chair of the board of directors of SBAM. David, welcome.
Thank you, Brian. It's good to be here.
Well, it's there's so many things that are happening, and today in our discussion, I wanted to just kind of open the door to a bunch of different topics that I thought might be aided by going to Data Monday first. So we've had this practice recently of going to the data at the back end of the conversation, but this time we're going to start out with it because so much of this is going to be relevant to the conversation that we're going to have a little bit later on. First, I've been meaning to get around for a couple of weeks to just a couple of slides on real estate. So if you look across the country, this is data with respect to new housing production or underproduction, as the case may be, which this data is always a couple of years old. But you'll look and see that that Michigan is one of those states that is kind of behind in overall new housing that would have been in demand. And of course, if you look at the states where everybody's been moving to, Texas and Florida in particular, that have experienced about a net increase of 750 to 1,000 people per day for the last 10 years, obviously that results in some pretty big declines. But David, you had mentioned to me, or you asked me just last week, my guess and what the average house price would be with respect to real estate in the United States. And I think that I guess somewhere around 250 or 275,000, which was completely inaccurate, as you can see from this chart. That if somebody were to, the median sales price of a home, single family residence in America today, over $400,000. And if you look at this chart in particular, it shows what's been happening with housing prices, and then the shaded areas are time periods where we have recessions. So you can see just kind of how housing prices have performed at more questionable economic times. Speaking of which, wanted to just share what's happened now. About a month ago, I'd mentioned that oil futures were coming down some, first sign that maybe we'd see the price at the pump start to come down. That price at the pump has started to come down, however, still at historic highs. So at around $4.50 a gallon, it had topped $5.01 on average, and some places in the country much higher than that. Of course, these are the averages. But as you can see, looking back to not too long ago, it was in the low threes, and so historically speaking, still very high fuel prices. And there's nothing to throw a wet blanket on economic activity like sustained high energy prices. In fact, that has been a pretty good indicator, both when you look at the real estate trends and looking at sustained high energy costs, that it spells a lot of questionable times in front of us in terms of economically. And of course, looking at the Chicago Fed survey of business conditions, so this is asking the owners of businesses what their confidence level is, and you'll see that it's actually lower today. As their outlook on the economy is lower than it was at the lowest point during the depths of the pandemic, and that, of course, is saying a lot. And then looking at the overall unemployment rate, as we head toward a more traditional definition of recession, which is 2 quarters in a row of shrinking GDP, you can have a recession without 2 quarters of shrinking GDP. But if you have 2 quarters of shrinking GDP, that's always been a definition recession in the past, and so there's some indication like, hey, look at unemployment. The unemployment rate, labor market is pretty strong, and since the labor market is strong, then maybe it won't. And then 2 quarters of shrinking GDP is not necessarily a recession, and well, that's definitely a redefinition, if you will, of that recessionary definition that we relied on for a really long time. And so looking at labor force participation rates, one of the reasons that you see the unemployment rate still low right now, even though these are questionable economic times, is because there are fewer people participating in the labor force in the first place. That pushes the rate down. And so I think in terms of economic health, it becomes a bit of an unreliable predictor of the indicator of overall economic health, like we may have considered it in the past. And why is the political system rushing to redefine what a recession is right now? Well, it's because we're about to meet the traditional definition of a recession, and the political class does not want America to think of it that way. But if you look at the Fed GDP estimate for second quarter, it definitely is going to show another quarter, so 2 quarters in a row of shrinking GDP, gross domestic product. So this would be the size of the U.S. economy shrinking 2 quarters in a row. And what they'd like to say is, yeah, but unemployment is not low, and therefore it's not really a recession. And of course, that is kind of redefining what we've known for a very long time. So David, maybe to get a little bit of reaction, somebody who's a lot of experience, spent your whole life in business, being an entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur, many different businesses. And when you look at this outlook today, and you look at the numbers, the GDP, unemployment, labor force participation rate, energy costs, inflation, all of these things stacking up, what does it tell you, getting outside of the traditional definitions in terms of the gut of the risk of tough economic times ahead?
Well, my first reaction when I read what is coming out of the White House about the recession, my first reaction was, this is absolutely absurd. You can't look at all the data and not see this coming. I guess really the question for me is, are we in a recession now? Or have we been in a recession for some time? Or if not now, it is going to be very, very soon. And it's going to question how deep and how long. The number one question I'm getting from my consulting clients right now is, how do we navigate through this recession? And I've been working with a number of them on the building of essentially a lifeboat plan to help them understand what they have available to them as far as resources, where things need to be adjusted, and where things can be changed in the event of a recession, and how that plan might change as a progression or as that recession continues. Now, the upside to the approach that the White House is taking is that I guess all the rules are off. For the longest time, if you're not going to accept 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP as being an indication of recession, then I'm no longer going to be considered overweight. My scale has said for years that I'm overweight, but I'm no longer going to believe my scale. I'm simply going to say that I'm not overweight. If that's where we are, then that's great for my weight and my self-esteem, but it does nothing for our small business community.
Another one of David Rhoa's famous analogies. Thanks for the insight. Actually, I want to come back to this question of like a lifeboat plan, if you will, and what business owners can do to prepare for just the culmination of all these different challenges and obstacles in front of us today. Now, we do have a guest on the show today, and I want to get to him now, Jim Tuber. And so Jim owns he's a restaurateur, but also bowling alleys. He's a pretty good example of a serial entrepreneur as well. Somebody who's very entrepreneurial and up from the Bay region of our state. And I want to talk about this recent court decision with respect to minimum wage and paid leave time. So this was we talked a little bit about this last week, but the court made a decision, the Court of Claims. So this is a lower level court. Somebody has a beef with the state, they start at the Court of Claims. Now, it was a very political decision. If you read the decision that the judge at the Court of Claims issued, that decision, it didn't even really attempt to use the law as the basis for the decision. So it's just a very political decision saying, hey, the way that the legislature handled this issue, I don't agree with it. It's not right. Therefore, it's illegal. And of course, it's not right part is an opinion, and didn't really offer any kind of references to law that to back up the decision. So what happens now is there's a request for a stay. That request for a stay of the decision, meaning to put that decision on hold until there's an appeal. And there has been an appeal that has been filed. We're hoping to hear soon whether or not that appeal will be accepted. I expect that it will be. And then the process will carry out. It'll probably end up going to the Supreme Court. Now, in the meantime, though, that this has a pretty big impact on many different businesses. But the most direct immediate impact are those under 50 employees will have to start offering paid sick leave. No indication whether or not a leave bank that mixes together vacation time and sick time and whatever other time together, does it have to now be bifurcated and accounted for separately to meet this new rule imposed by this Court of Claims judge, or attempted to be imposed? And there's a hike in the minimum wage. It would be an immediate 20% increase in the minimum wage for regular minimum wage, but it would do away with the tipped minimum wage. And so anybody in the restaurant business, this is really a sea change, a massive change in the whole business model of the way the organization works. So for a little bit of insight into that, I want to invite Jim. Jim, let's start out. First of all, thanks for coming on the Small Business Briefing. Could you share with our audience? We're on. I know we didn't connect right before, but we're on Facebook Live on SBAM's Facebook page right now. And wondered if you could just share just a little bit about your businesses, and then we'll launch in with some questions about how this court decision would impact those in your industry.
Can you hear me okay?
Sure can.
All right. Well, I have 2 bowling centers, and we're seasonal in nature. So this is a great concern for us in the bowling centers. And then I also have I'm a partner in 4 Japanese bistro and steakhouses. A pretty popular concept these days. Certainly, especially on the server side there, I think, it's going to be extremely difficult to manage.
Yeah, so Jim, you got a lot of different business interests then, and obviously create a tremendous amount of opportunity for people in your communities to have a career. What in terms of this impact, give me an idea of impact. I mean, what does it do to your business model, and what, just maybe some insight and peeking behind the curtain, and if this were to go into effect, the type of upheaval that it could cause for your business?
Well, I think that anybody who's surveyed current servers in the past, they like the way the system is. Yeah, my servers are typically the highest paid people in my building for the most part. They don't generally work full time, but they make full-time money. If we go to this system where we have to pay them $12 an hour, we're going to have to change the whole tip structure, and they're not going to make the kind of money they make anymore. And I think what we're going to see is, as if we don't already have a big enough shortage of servers now, it's going to become worse, because when they can't make the kind of money they're making now, they're not going to be interested in that career path anymore. I really feel it's going to turn our world upside down, and then adding, additional costs to us, adding in the paid sick time stuff.
Yeah, and the paid sick time too, just so everybody's clear, and you had mentioned, being a seasonal business, a lot of times historically the way that benefit structures have worked, the part-time didn't carry the same suite of benefits as full-time, but this paid sick leave regulation that the Court of Claims is seeking to impose on businesses, it would actually apply, it would just accrue based on hours worked. And so there would be no distinction between full and part-time with this respect. Jim, could you talk a little bit about the pile-on impact that this sort of decision would have? I mean, it's not like this is happening in isolation. Over the last couple of years, those in your line of business, whether it's in the restaurant or the bowling centers, were closed for a long time. And even when you could open, there were restrictions that were in place for a long time. And then supply chain issues with getting the food in what you in order to prepare and to resell, and the workforce shortages, and just across the board the struggles and challenges since the onset of this pandemic, some directly in relation to the government response to the pandemic, and then this being one more thing on top of all of that.
Well, every one of my restaurants today still is shorthanded. Not only from a server aspect, but I'm struggling to find busboys. I'm struggling to find dishwashers. But on top of that, in our industry, after the second shutdown, most of the hibachi chefs left the state, and they're never coming back. On top of that, the whole COVID disruption, a lot of these guys, I mean, there was a regular churn of people coming from overseas into the US. Well, that all stopped during the COVID. So now there's a void, just like we see in the hospital industry. There's a gap there's a shortage of nurses. It's the same for the professionals in our industry. Two of my restaurants right now, I don't have a sushi chef for, and it's not a career that you can just train somebody in 10 minutes. These are highly skilled positions. We pay them a lot of money, and we can't fill those slots right now. So we're working reduced hours with a higher food cost. We're at a point where we had very profitable businesses up till 2020, and now we're operating in a business model that's not sustainable, and we're piling on. We're gonna add paid sick leave to it. It's gonna put, I think, a significant number of traditional small businesses over the edge.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point too, is that the businesses impacted by this decision are in the industries that are most impacted are industries that are dominated by small business. So we hear all the time the lip service from the politicians. They'll say small businesses are the backbone of the economy, and they say they're pro small business. And now more than ever, we need them to actually act like it. These aren't just words coming out of their mouth. We need their actions to meet those words. Jim, thanks so much for coming on the small business briefing and just offering a little bit of insight into the impact of the decision on your business. Best luck to you and all the different enterprises that you're involved in.
Thanks, Brian, and thanks for your years of service to Michigan.
All right, very good. Thank you, Jim. And so, David, let's set the some of the context for this too. That we have actually, how about from a scope standpoint? Back in 2019, there were 160,000 employees in Michigan that were at minimum wage. Today, it's 40,000. So the number of people at minimum wage has been declining year over year, and that's a pretty big drop, a third of what, one fourth of what it was just a few years ago.
Yeah.
And then looking at those that are currently at $12 an hour or less, it was 938,000 Michigan workers in 2019. That's cut down to 685,000 today. And one thing I think maybe kind of a misconception is that's where the impact would be. But we have to assume that it's going to push the wage scale for many businesses. So
absolutely.
Yeah, and so it's like, you can't just say, well, we're going to move these employees up, and then employees that are already at $12 an hour, where they're going to say, hey, the entry level jobs in this are at 12. I'm just going to go ahead and accept that. And so it ends up pushing the whole wage scale. And doesn't that just put us right back in this cycle of inflation, rising costs, which ends up hurting the very employees that they were trying to help in the first place?
Absolutely. And even those businesses out there say, well, we don't pay the minimum wage, so we pay well above minimum wage, are affected by this because the vast majority, and I encourage our members to do this, go out and talk to your employees who are on an hourly basis and ask them, what did you make last year? And I can almost guarantee you that they will describe what they make in terms of dollars per hour. They may have made $40,000 last year or something to that effect, but they see it as I made $20 an hour, $10 an hour, $15 an hour. They think of in terms of dollars per hour. So when you raise the rate, let's say the rate is now, what is it, 930 or 973? Is that right?
Yeah, I think it might be like 984.
Okay. So if you're paying someone now $14 an hour, you're well above $14 or $4 an hour more than the minimum wage. That number jumps to $12 an hour by court of claims fiat. Then the people who are making $14 an hour begin to describe that as I'm only making $2 more than minimum wage. And that has upward pressure on all wages. And it actually begins to degrade the value of the job that you have available. People say, well, you're only paying minimum wage. I'm paying minimum wage that up until 15 minutes ago was a third less than what we're asked to pay now. To say nothing of the paid time off. I don't know how small businesses with fewer than 50 employees are going to manage this. They don't have HR departments and typically don't have HR departments. They don't typically have the software necessary to manage that. And to simply say, yeah, you have to provide that to all associates, all employees, is a tremendous, tremendous burden. It's fascinating to hear what Jim is saying about his restaurants. They've been wanting to do outside groups, and the groups that proposed all of this came from outside of Michigan. These were not organic to Michigan, and they've been after the tipped wage for quite some time. And now they're essentially saying, we know what's best for you, professional server. We know what's best for your family. And those jobs, the vast majority of those jobs are going to have less value to the people working there if this thing actually is implemented.
Well, and hopefully it won't be. Actually, just looking it up to 987 is the current minimum wage. So more than a 20% increase. But again, for tipped wages, it would be many multiples from where it stands today. So just a big sea change, and one that we do expect that there probably will be a stay issued. SBAM and some other business organizations will support the appeal that is going to be working its way through the system. And it's just one of these awkward cases where there's going to be two sets of attorney general, assistant attorney generals that are working both sides of the case. One representing our current attorney general, who would like to see the increases on small businesses, and then a different side of the house that is obligated to defend the laws and the authority of the state of Michigan and the ability of the legislature to make and enact laws, which is pretty important. I mean, these are the people's representatives. These are the ones you actually get to go to their coffee hours and talk to and get a response from. These are the representatives of the people, and this decision is going to have a lot to say on whether or not our representatives have the ability to make and change laws, which is something that we'll have a great interest in. So,
Brian, you're absolutely right. And just a real quick point on that, the ability when this came through, the legislature made the decision to approve and then adapt or change what they did. And if they're not permitted to make those kind of changes in the same session, as seems to be implied by this Court of Claims ruling, we would be sitting here today most likely with a sales tax on services. If you recall, the state of Michigan imposed a sales tax on services several years ago, and then within 48 hours rescinded it. So if the case can be made that you can't, once you make a decision at the legislative level, that you can't rescind it for some period of time, that's going to be a real problem. And you make a good point of pointing out that these were the people's representatives. This wasn't a county commissioner who said we're not going to impose this, or we're going to change it. These were the people who were elected to make these kind of decisions. So it'll be very interesting to see, because and I think what hangs in the balance here is significant, both for small business and for our state in general, as to how we allow our legislature to do their job.
Absolutely. It's going to be, it's actually a really important issue that we'll follow through, and we don't get involved in a lot of court cases, but SBAM will be, I expect, with several other business groups teaming up to lend our voice to this process.
Well, let's shift gears from, we were talking about politics. We've kind of snuck up on it. We're just over a week away from an election, and SBAM and its staff has been hard at work finding and interviewing and vetting candidates for the House and the Senate. And what can you tell us about what information is available to our members and to interested parties about who has been endorsed by SBAM?
Yeah, we'll put some links into the comments, but basically we have gone through and vetted many dozens and dozens of different state legislative races and have made recommendations. We are a strategically bipartisan organization. You'll see both Republicans and Democrats supported throughout our recommendations. Our criteria is not political party, it is pro small business. And so you could follow the link and see if we've made a recommendation in your district. There's all new district lines. So this is a really important part of the process here, as it kind of sets the stage for the next 10 years with these new legislative district maps. The other thing that we did this year is even though we have not taken a position in the governor's race, we'll wait until after the primaries to determine whether or not we take a position in this race. We did ask the 5 Republicans and our current governor to answer some questions on small business issues, to put together a voter's guide. We will put a link to that in the comments as well, so that you can go through and see where, first of all, whether we've endorsed in your legislative race, and also of the 5 Republicans that are seeking to be the Republican nominee and our current governor, where do they stand on issues that are important to small businesses, and very insightful. So there's some narrative, but also some yes and no questions on issues that are particularly important to small business.
Ryan, I want to stay national or go national for just a minute in the time that we have left. Could you give us a better understanding of what a climate emergency is? That term got thrown around quite a bit last week, and I'm curious as to how many of our members actually understand fully what's at stake with a climate emergency.
Yeah, thankfully, we might have dodged this bullet, but once it was clear that a lot of the environmental proposals that were on the table, which would have significantly increased costs to small businesses, that Senator Manchin of West Virginia wasn't going to go along with them. Therefore, they weren't going to be able to get them through the Senate, with or without a filibuster. They just weren't going to be able to get 50+1 votes in the Senate. Then all of a sudden there was a big push to say, okay, President Biden, you should declare a climate emergency, or in other words, declare an emergency, so that emergency powers, bypassing the legislative process, the congressional process, lawmaking process, to just essentially enact new laws. And so the idea was use emergency powers, call it a climate emergency, and then enact new laws, which would have been very costly for business owners at a time of already very big cost increases and inflation. Thankfully, the White House did end up pulling back from that and saying they're not going to go down that road, which you always, all of these, the people that are in office, they have to consider that at some point the shoe will be on the other foot. And the more you bypass process, the more you risk that in the future, some other elected person who is of a different mindset from you will just undo it and go further the other direction. So there's some value, benefit to process. And thankfully, it appears as though this this notion of a climate emergency might be behind us.
Wonderful. Well, if we have time, you can tell better than I. Last week, Ford Motor Company was in the news. Do you have time to talk about what was talked about last week?
Yeah, let's go ahead and close with this, that Ford Motor Company had indicated there was a report, at first unconfirmed, that they were going to be downsizing their workforce by about 8,000. Didn't say where, but of course that's going to impact Michigan because it's where the headquarters is. And so the company later on sent out a communication to its staffs saying, look, they're going to have to cut costs in order to be competitive in the future. And the reason I thought it made sense to kind of put this on the list of things to talk about is because we are at a point where we're still very reliant on manufacturing in this state, and there's been a lot of effort to try to lock down more of that investment in the future. However, the changes coming up are massive, and so it's going to continue to create, the reliance on that industry is going to tend to create some more upheaval in Michigan's economy, both alignment with the workforce that we have, but also just overall size of workforce. We still got a lot of eggs in that basket. That's one overall economically is still a big risk for our state. So that's the time that we have. I wanted to also close by thanking our sponsor, the Marana Group, and they're a data document distribution company, one that SBAM uses, by the way. We are one of their customers and have been for a very long time because they do such a great job. Thank you to our sponsors at Marana Group. Thanks to Jim. And thanks to David for joining for the small business briefing. And we'll be back. Remember the Sunday schedule. So back next week on Monday, where we'll have hopefully good news and update, hoping for a stay and an acceptance of an appeal on the court decision on minimum wage and paid sick leave. See you in a week.